The Battle of Life, a Victorian fable by Charles Dickens, first published in 1846. This is a story of sisters, sacrifice, and the quiet battles fought not with swords, but with patience, honesty, and the difficult courage to repair what has been damaged.
The village lay where a battle had once raged, so long ago that no one living could remember the smoke, only the names. The old field had softened into orchard and meadow. The ditches had become hedgerows, and the ground that had been trampled by horses now carried apple trees, heavy with fruit. On the edge of that quiet place stood Dr. Jedler's house, an old, comfortable building whose windows looked out toward the battleground, and whose rooms seemed forever warmed by an excellent fire and by the gentle rule of two sisters. Dr. Jedler was a good-natured widower with a hobby that he called a philosophy. He liked to insist, usually with a smile, sometimes with a laugh that arrived a little too quickly, that life was a farce, and that the sensible man should treat it as such. Grace, the elder daughter, heard him with affection and answered him with patience. She was quiet by nature, steady in temper, and in that way of being calm which makes other people calmer too. Marian, the younger, seemed made for sunlight. She was lively without cruelty, quick without malice, and so loved at home that it was difficult to imagine her ever bringing sorrow to any heart that had once known her. The household was completed by two servants who belonged to the place as naturally as the orchard did. Clemency Newcomb, Clemmy, when the world was friendly, was all angles and elbows and bustling good intentions. She could be vain in a comical way and sentimental in a sincere one, and she had a habit of turning ordinary objects into treasured mottos and moral lessons. Benjamin Britten, called Little Britain to distinguish him from a larger namesake elsewhere, was the opposite, slow, skeptical, and perpetually dissatisfied, as if someone had promised him a clear explanation of life and had delivered only riddles. He served the doctor faithfully, yet he listened to the doctor's life is a joke speeches as though they were responsible for his indigestion.
On Marian's birthday, as the orchard was made ready for breakfast, two solicitors arrived, Mr. Snitchy and Mr. Craggs, partners so long and so closely that they spoke and moved like a single legal creature with two bodies. They had come on business concerning Alfred Heathfield, Dr. Jedler's ward. Alfred had been brought up in the doctor's care after his father's death, and his future had been planned with the meticulous seriousness that Dr. Jedler pretended to despise. Alfred was to study medicine, to travel, to learn, and to return. He was also, in the village's quiet understanding, promised to Marian. Alfred arrived, that morning full of hope, handsome, young, eager to be admired and to admire. His affection for Marian was plain. His trust in Grace was even plainer. Before he left for his studies, he placed Marian into Grace's keeping with a kind of earnestness that made the moment feel heavier than a birthday breakfast deserved. And yet the day tried to be light. The doctor joked. The lawyers argued about whether law made life serious. Clemency clattered about. Britten scowled. Marian laughed. Grace smiled and arranged everyone so that the happiest people sat nearest the people they loved. Soon the coach arrived. Alfred departed. The orchard gate closed. The household returned to its ordinary rhythm. It might have continued so, quietly and pleasantly, if another man had not come into their story. Michael Warden was not an evil man, but he had lived as if consequences belonged to other people. He was restless, proud, and reckless. He carried trouble the way a storm carries lightning, sometimes unseen until it strikes. He had once been injured in a riding accident near the doctor's garden wall and had recovered under Dr. Jedler's roof. That weeks-long closeness brought him into daily contact with Marian. Daily contact and daily fascination. Warden was deep in debt and in danger. He meant to leave England to escape the ruin behind him. And yet, before he fled, he allowed himself a final folly. He believed he could take Marian with him.
The village saw pieces of the danger without seeing the full shape. Mr. Snitchy and Mr. Craggs, who knew of Warden's plans, fretted and advised caution. Clemency watched Marian with the anxious devotion of someone who loves a younger creature and is afraid of the world. Britain heard rumors and disapproved of everything in advance. Grace saw more than any of them. If she had been asked, she might have said, as she often did, gently, that she trusted Marian. But she also knew that Marian had been young when she promised herself to Alfred, and that a young heart can be faithful and still be confused. As Alfred's return drew near, after years abroad and hard study, the house filled with preparations. There were wreaths, music, and a kind of bright expectation that made even the winter air seem cheerful. On the night set for welcome and celebration, the house was crowded and noisy. The doctor, who talked of farces, wanted his ward home with an eagerness he would never have called serious. Alfred was delayed. While people waited and danced, Marian slipped away. She left behind a letter begging forgiveness and insisting that her choice, however it looked, was not wicked. The words were tender enough to break a father's heart, and vague enough to drive it mad with questions. When Alfred finally arrived, he came to a room full of confusion. Faces turned away, voices broken, Grace pale as though the life had drained out of her. Marian was gone. The village did what villages do. It searched, it whispered, it judged, it pitted, it argued. Some were certain she had eloped with Warden. Others insisted she had been abducted. A few, kinder than they sounded, said she had been led astray. Grace said little. Dr. Jedler, who had laughed at the world for years, discovered that grief does not accept philosophy as payment. The farce he had preached felt suddenly like cruelty, and he wanted the house like a man who had misplaced his soul.
Time passed. Not the clean, straightforward time of calendars, but the slow time in which a family learns to live with an empty chair. Clemency married Benjamin Britten. The skeptical servant, to his own surprise, became the keeper of a small tavern in the village, a place with a sign called the Nutmeg Grater. Clemency, now a wife with children and endless lists of errands, looked fuller and happier than before, but her love for Marian remained as sharp as ever.
Alfred stayed. In the years that followed, he changed. The boy who had left on a coach returned as a man, a doctor in earnest, disciplined by work and softened by sorrow. He loved Marian still, but love has a way of altering when its object becomes a memory. He and Grace were bound together by the same loss, the same duty, the same daily acts of care for Dr. Jedler. And in the quiet of those years, affection grew into something steadier. At last they married. It was not a loud wedding, nor a triumphant one. It was a marriage built from shared endurance, a promise to keep life going when it seemed to have stopped. They had a child, and they named her Marian.
Dr. Jedler, after a long season of bitterness, found his way back to kindness. He began to speak of his lost daughter with tears and praise rather than with anger. He visited his sister, Aunt Martha, more often. In those sharp conversations, there was the strange comfort of family truth. And still, through the years, there were letters, few and guarded, addressed to Grace in a hand that Grace knew. They said little and explained nothing. They promised again and again that the truth would come at the right time.
On the sixth time the household sat together on Marion's birthday since her disappearance, counting that night as one, and counting every sorrowful year between, Grace waited with a patience that had become part of her. She held the old letters close, as if paper could hold a person. At sunset, as the day fell away, a carriage arrived. Marion returned.
She was older, but her face was still hers, the same clear eyes, the same brightness that sorrow had not extinguished but refined. She stood at the door, and the whole room seemed to lose its breath.
Dr. Jedler, who had spent years learning to forgive a phantom, now held the living girl and could only say her name. Grace reached for her, and in that moment all the calm she had practiced for 6 years trembled. When Marion could speak at last, she asked to tell the truth from her own lips. And the truth was stranger than the village's gossip, kinder than the harshest judgment, and more painful than anyone had guessed.
Marion confessed first what she had never had the courage to confess before she fled. She had not loved Alfred as a bride ought to love. She had tried. She had wished to. She had been grateful and affectionate, and ashamed of her own uncertainty. But the man she had loved, misplaced, dangerous, and yet real in her heart, was Michael Warden.
Warden, on the edge of flight from England and from his debts, had offered Marion marriage in the secrecy of letters. He believed she dreaded Alfred's return. He believed her engagement was more a family arrangement than a passion of the heart. Marion refused him.
Not because she did not love him, but because she loved Grace too. She had seen what Grace would never say aloud, that Grace's quiet devotion to Alfred had existed for years, long before Alfred had learned to recognize it. Marion understood, in a flash of terrible clarity, that her own uncertain promise to Alfred, made too young, kept too long, was blocking 2 lives. So she chose an act that looked like betrayal so that it might become a kind of rescue.
She vanished, self-banished, leaving behind the letter that would protect her family from worse suspicions and protect Alfred from the truth before he was ready to bear it. She went to live with Aunt Martha, not as a romantic runaway, but as a penitent in hiding. There were countries, she said, where women take vows and withdraw from the world to conquer a passion that feels wrong. She could not take such vows, but she could choose solitude and discipline. Her absence, she believed, would allow Alfred to see Grace. It did. Grace listened, and with each sentence her face changed, not with anger at Marion, but with the ache of realizing how much her sister had carried alone. When Marion told her plainly that she had done it to give Grace the chance of happiness, Grace's pride and gratitude fought with sorrow. For Grace had mourned Marion as lost. Now she was asked to accept that Marion had willingly become a ghost.
The room might have fallen into silence and tears for the rest of the night, but life, farce or not, had still more to bring. Mr. Snitchy appeared, older and grayer now, and speaking for Self and Craggs, deceased since his partner had died in the years between. He came with the careful excitement of a man who has guarded a secret too long and is finally allowed to set it down. He brought Clemency and Ben Britton as well, for Clemency had never forgiven herself for believing Marian dead. And then, at the edge of the orchard, Michael Warden stood.
He was changed, less showy, less reckless, dressed in black as if he had buried something in himself. In all those years, he had kept his promise of silence. He had carried his part of the truth like a burden and like a penance. He asked forgiveness, not with dramatics and not with excuses. He said only that he had abused the hospitality of the house long ago, that he had been a fool, that he had learned self-reproach, and that if he could be treated with gentleness, he would try to live in a way that deserved it.
Dr. Jedler looked at him for a long time. Then the doctor, who had once called everything a joke and had later learned the weight of grief, did the simplest serious thing he had ever done. He forgave him.
Marian, trembling now in a different way than she had on the night she vanished, took Warden's hand. It was not the triumphant clasp of a romantic story. It was the steady joining of two people who had been made older by their own choices. The family, like a knot pulled too tight for years, loosened. There was laughter, too. Real laughter, not the kind that pretends. Clemency cried and laughed at once and hugged everybody within reach, including herself. Ben Britton, who claimed he understood nothing, understood enough to stand close beside his wife. Later, when the house had quieted again and the orchard was only an orchard, Dr. Jedler admitted, without surrendering all of his old humor, that perhaps life was not a farce to be laughed at, but a struggle to be met. And if there was a victory in the battle of life, it was not winning a person like a prize. It was winning the courage to choose rightly, to suffer for love without making love into a weapon, and to forgive when forgiveness is hardest, before time makes it irrelevant.
This has been The Battle of Life by Charles Dickens. A story reminding us that the greatest battles are not fought with swords, but with patience, honesty, and the difficult courage to repair what has been damaged.